Hey everyone, Corey here, and welcome back to Family Twist, where secrets are the ultimate plot twist. Today's guest, Chris, doesn't have a shocking DNA test discovery or a decades-long search story. In fact, Chris has known his birth parents his entire life. His adoption was open, intentional, and filled with love from the very beginning. But what makes his story remarkable isn't just the structure of his family, it's how deeply he's reflected on the emotional layers that come with being adopted. Chris shares how, even in a fully open adoption, with incredibly loving and forward-thinking parents, the primal wound, that feeling of needing to be enough to belong, still finds its way in. He also opens up about surviving a life-threatening illness as a child, working through trauma in therapy, and how discovering this podcast helped him feel more connected and less alone. This is part one of our conversation with Chris. Chris, welcome to the Family Twist podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Kendall and I really appreciate the openness and candor of your story that you shared with us. If you could start off, kind of just share a little bit about your adoptive parents.
Yeah, so my adoptive parents, they both worked in education. They're both retired now. My dad was a teacher. My mom was a guidance counselor. And when they got married in 1984. They tried having kids and they were unsuccessful. When they started to go to a fertility clinic to try and see what the problem was, they were told that they couldn't solve why there were infertility issues. My mom believes that most likely her genetics were the cause because her sister also could not have biological children. They kept trying, wasn't working, and then they tried to go through the route of an egg donor and then a surrogate mother. It was my mom's best friend who was going to carry their child, who was going to be the surrogate mother. They had to go through this whole long process of finding the donor. My dad, he taught government and econ at a high school. He taught all seniors, and while they were doing this process, he was so excited about it and so interested about it. He was telling his students all about in vitro, how it's working, surrogacy, really excited and kind of saying in a way of like, miracles can happen. You just got to, with the right technology and time and effort, it can happen. And sadly, it did not work. The surrogacy did not work. The eggs weren't able to implant. And my parents were disappointed. They hadn't really fully talked about adoption. It was just kind of, we'll see what happens. Maybe they were a little hesitant on doing adoption, not knowing what the circumstances could have been in terms of the birth parents. So my dad talked about this to his students. And I believe it was in September, October. And in January, when they came back, a student came up to him after class and was like, "Hey, you haven't talked about how the in vitro went. Did it work?" And he was like, "No, it sadly didn't work." And a couple months later, in about April, this same student who asked about if the in vitro had worked came to my dad's class crying with her friend. And the student says, "I have something to tell you. I'm pregnant." And he said, "Okay." And she said, "And I can't take care of the baby. Would you like to adopt my baby?" Crazy story.
Not something that the high school teachers expect to hear.
No, and so my dad said he was, "Well, you should meet my wife first."
Yeah.
And so after my biological mother graduated high school, a couple months later, she passed the class with a D+, I think. Her and my biological father, they went to my parents' house to talk about everything, and they all hit it off, clicked, and they decided to move forward with the adoption. And my adoptive parents were part of my pregnancy. When my birth mom had the baby shower, my adoptive mom was there. She had a balloon under her shirt, like she was also pregnant.
Oh.
So really just incorporating my adoptive parents into the whole pregnancy process. And yeah, it's a beautiful story. The reason why my biological mom couldn't take care of me is because she was 18 and she knew that she was too young, couldn't give me the life that she would want to give her child. But also, my biological father had problems with drugs and alcohol, and she knew that he wouldn't have been able to be there as much for me. So she decided that when she found out she was pregnant, that adoption was the best option. She thought, wait a minute, I know exactly who could do this, who I would want to raise my child. She saw that giving my adoptive parents me was like a gift to them of being able to raise a child, and also a gift to me to have a stable, loving home. But I'm so thankful that she was able to do what was best for me.
Absolutely.
And yeah.
I obviously, Kendall and I don't know your parents at all, but I can only imagine what those conversations were like and what kind of people they are that would make a young pregnant girl feel comfortable, like, okay, this is the right decision. These are the people who should raise my child.
My parents are some of the most wonderful people on the planet. Hearing when Kendall talks about his adoptive parents, I feel like my adoptive parents are very similar to yours. Just very forward-thinking, very open, loving, and just accepting of anything. Like, and my mom, my adoptive mom, she's the best. She read so many books about adoption and what the best kind of adoption could be, like how to raise a child that isn't biologically yours, what can go into that. And the woman, my mom's best friend, who was going to be the surrogate mother, she has a stepdaughter who got pregnant around 18 and gave a child up for adoption. And there is an open adoption, so she goes and is part of her biological child's life. And so my mom, knowing that this was a thing, researched it more and decided that having an open adoption would be for the best. I didn't realize how open it was going to be at that time, but it was never going to be a secret. It was never going to be, they sit me down at like some age and then tell me, you're adopted, here are your biological parents. It was just going to be, I would always know, and I would know where I came from. And I'm really thankful that they had the forethought to do that.
Yeah. And, I have to give a shout out. Thank you for mentioning my parents. They wanted that for me.
Yeah.
And it wasn't part of the equation, and especially when I didn't realize that my adoptive mother was terminally ill because I was so young. But in retrospect, when I think about the way that she talked about it during that period, I think it really bothered her that she thought she was going to be leaving me. Still wouldn't have that answer about who my biological parents were. So I knew that I had their support by the time I started searching, as an adult, even though they were already both gone, my adoptive parents. I knew in my heart that I wasn't hurting that. It couldn't hurt them, but you know what I'm saying? Like,
exactly.
Discrediting their memories by searching. Yeah.
I even have dealt with some of those feelings, even though I've known my biological parents my entire life. I've also dealt with some of those feelings of like guilt of like, part of me wishing I could have been raised by them. I think it was Mother's Day. I was talking with my adoptive mom about a lot of the anxiety I have of not feeling good enough, which I thought stemmed from my adoptive grandmother. I thought it came from that. And I had a revelation in therapy that, maybe the I'm not good enough stuff, I feel that because I feel like I need to be good enough to belong in whatever way. And I've had the thought of, I wonder if my adoption is part of this. And I would immediately throw it to the side and think, there's no way. There's no way. I've known my birth parents my entire life. I know my biological family, like their extended family, like my birth mom's family. My birth mom's sister joked that I wasn't adopted. They just adopted my adoptive parents.
Yeah.
Like going to family events, always growing up. They're fully a part of my life. There's no distinction in my mind between my adoptive family and my birth family in terms of seeing it. It's just their family. I see them all the time. And so I thought, well, I don't have this like a detachment that makes me feel like I don't belong because I know where I belong. And then my adoptive mom brought up the, primal wound, all this stuff, and it just all clicked.
Mm.
And I've gone on this journey of a lot of self-discovery, finding your podcast, just listening to all these episodes and thinking, oh my God, I'm not alone.
Mm-hmm.
My feelings aren't weird. I do belong. And I belong in this community of adoptees, NPEs, donor conceived, that there's just this trend of so many shared experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Even though my story doesn't involve any twists or as me being alive. Did that make sense?
Yeah,
All the twists happened before I was born. Actually, well, there are a couple that happened later, but like I didn't have any like, oh my God, I'm adopted. Who am I? Where do I belong? I didn't have any of that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just that first I was taken away from my biological mother. That just rewired me to be this way. I would have already had anxiety in some sense because it definitely runs in my family on my biological side. But I think me having that biological predisposition to anxiety with being taken away from my biological mother implanted the anxiety of not belonging,
Mm-hmm.
not knowing where I am. And then the way my adoptive grandmother, by talking about one cousin a lot, kind of having a codependent relationship with her daughter, my aunt, and just them always being the focus, my aunt and my cousin, kind of made me feel othered. And I think my small, 3-year-old brain, which even though she was not doing this intentionally, thought, oh, she's talking about this cousin. This is why I don't belong, is because I'm not as good as my cousin. So I need to be good enough. I need to be like my cousin. And it's been years and years of unpacking that. And there have been other things that have kept me from, confronting those feelings. Like when I was 7, I contracted E. coli from unpasteurized milk, and I was hospitalized for 2 months.
Wow.
And had kidney failure. I was put on a ventilator. I had to be flight lifted twice. I almost died. And that event was so traumatic. It became the focus of my young mind. It ruled my life for so long. And through therapy, specifically EMDR therapy, when I was 10, and then I went back when I was 19, was instrumental in helping me overcome that trauma.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for disclosing that. I mean, that's a horrible thing for anybody, but especially a younger child. Through the similarity I think that you and I have is that through therapy, I figured out some things because people in my life, probably even now, but especially when I was younger, they thought I was fiercely independent, and which is true. And by going to therapy and talking it through, I think I thought I had to be, and not because of feeling othered, almost, maybe you will understand this as an adoptee, feel like as a child, if my cousins were succeeding at something, I had to do at least as well as they did, if not better. And maybe that's just my personality, because I'm the least competitive person in general. But when I think about my past, the first time I got straight A's, my adoptive father and mother were very focused on education, and they were so proud of me. And it became my goal to always please them, doing things in a weird way. Like, I think
you had to earn love, you had to earn affection, kind of.
I just saw how much it brought them joy for me to succeed, So they weren't stage parents, but it felt like everything that I did, they almost overdid it with the support.
Yeah.
It was cute, but it was also a little stressful in retrospect. Like,
Yeah.
holy shit, give me a minute, I'm 6. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But to your point, you love your parents the way I loved mine.
Mhm.
They were just wonderful people that were trying to make the best of a situation,
Yeah.
they child, and I'm the one they got.
Like I was the one they got, and they did a great job, and I'm really thankful for them.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yeah.
that's important to talk about, that you did have this wonderful upbringing and unusual to have such a close tie to your birth family, but
Yeah.
that primal wound is still very real. And I think that's something that takes a long time to realize. For you to get to that realization, you've mentioned therapy, which is great, but at such a young age, having that kind of understanding is really important, because it takes people sometimes decades, or they never reach that level. They never understand exactly why they feel the way they feel.
Yeah. And it makes, and thinking back to like things that I have thought when I was a child, primal wound completely, it explains it. Like both my adopted parents have blue eyes, and I have hazel brown eyes. So I remember being like 5, 6, like staring at myself in the mirror, wondering what I would look like if I had blue eyes, wishing I had blue eyes so I could look more like them, so I could fit in. And which is such a weird, like, to think back, what a weird thought to just have. That wasn't implanted, that wasn't said or anything. It was just, it was like, what a weird thing to just like think as a child. And like, it's weird because like I look enough like my adoptive parents that if I hadn't been told I was adopted, I don't think people would have questioned it. And people haven't questioned it. They're like, "Wait, you look like you look like your mother." And I'm like, I mean, yeah, like we have the same hair colors, like both me and my adoptive parents, it just, there's enough that it kind of looks like it. It kind of looks like your biological child. But when I'm next to my birth parents, it's like, oh, like I have all my facial expressions from my birth father. I have a very similar body type to like some of my birth mom's side, and to my birth dad, like just his like lankiness I got. It's my face, everything is like, oh, it's completely, definitely you are their biological child, which I think is funny to think about, like the nature and nurture stuff as well. But, and speaking of like the eye color, I think, like when you're like in biology class, you learn about like Punnett squares and like dominant and recessive traits, and that blue eyes are a recessive trait and brown eyes are a dominant trait. So 2 blue-eyed people can't have a brown-eyed child. And I remember learning that in 7th grade and thinking, oh, that makes, yeah, that's, yeah. And my biology teacher mentioned how some student found out that they were adopted through this. And so I played a little prank on her when she was walking by, that I was like, weird, my parents have blue eyes and attached earlobes, and I have detached and brown eyes. And I just saw her go sheet white.
Oh, no.
Like, oh no, another one. But I told her immediately. I was like, no, I know, I'm adopted. I know.
Wow. Well, you made me have a memory about my situation, because both of my adoptive parents had blue eyes, and I had blue eyes. And I remember commenting as a child when I learned about eye color, saying, oh, wasn't I lucky? You know what I mean? Like I didn't. You might have heard me say, we look like a family that was put together, because my father was like super dark black hair. He was a white man, but he was super like naturally tan. And then my mother was like alabaster skin, reddish hair. And here I was kind of in between with blonde hair. And when people would say to my parents when I was a child, we'd be in town and they'd see people they hadn't seen in years, and they'd say, this is our son. And people would undoubtedly say, oh, he looks just like you guys. And we'd all three look at each other like, no, you're crazy. And it was because I always knew, and there was shame in it.
Yeah, exactly. I always, when people are like, oh, you still look so much like your parents, I always laugh, and I do the same thing of like, well, I'm adopted, so I don't.
Right.
But like one time I did theater in high school, and my dad came pick me up from rehearsal one time, and we were talking to my theater teacher, the director, and as we turned and we were walking away, she was like, "You two have the same walk."
Mm.
And I was like, that's weird. That must have been a learned behavior or something. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there is some research out there about how if a child is adopted younger, they tend to look a little more like they're adopted. And I don't know, as you eat the same food, you know what I mean? Like, what is it? But it is interesting to me. I love sort of research because, it's probably a mix of everything. But I do love the nature versus nurture because now that we know my biological family on both sides, I feel so much more similar to my adoptive family,
Yeah. Growing, I think I have an interesting experience having known my biological family my entire life. My adoptive parents didn't realize that it was going to be as open as it was. When I was born, my adoptive parents were at the hospital. My birth dad was at the hospital. My adoptive parents' family was at the hospital, and my birth mom's family was at the hospital. The whole gang showed up on both sides for my birth. My adoptive family, they were all so happy that my parents were getting a child. And my birth family, they were so sad because they felt like they were losing a child. My adoptive mom says it was like you had both sides right there of loss and of gaining. My adoptive aunt went to my birth family, was like, Chris is going to have the most wonderful life. These are great people. And so then my adoptive parents, they took me home from the hospital, and it was a week later. So I was born mid-December, like a week before Christmas. And Christmas Eve, my adoptive mom goes to my birth mom's house to like bring photos and things, and says, "Hey, Chris is gonna, want to know you." And they just planned. I think they were planning on like, sending letters and stuff. But I was like, Chris is gonna want to know you. Why don't you just, come over and like have, and like just make it not weird, make it just normal. And so my birth parents, they visited me a month after I was born. My birth mom's parents came a little later. My birth dad's grandparents came. His dad and his stepmom came. Like it just became they would come and visit, and then every year my adoptive parents, they called it birth family days. Even though I think just family day or whatever is it would have been a better name. But my adoptive family and my birth family, they would come to the house, and we just have a pool party and just be together to like celebrate this. And having everybody there was wonderful.
Well, that was just the beginning of Chris's story, and wow, there's something incredibly powerful about hearing someone who always knew where they came from still wrestle with that deep internal question of where they fit. Chris's perspective is such an important reminder that love and openness don't erase the emotional complexity of adoption. Sure, they're a beautiful foundation, but there's still grief, still identity work, and still lots of healing to do. In part 2 next week, we'll explore even more how nature and nurture have shaped who Chris is today, and how he continues to process what it means to belong to two families equally and fully. As always, thanks for listening. The Family Twist podcast is presented by Savoir Faire Marketing Communications and produced by How the Cow Ate the Cabbage, LLC.